think there are a few people still coming in, but we're going to get going. We have people following us on live stream, and I want to be respectful of their time as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lynette Clementson, and I'm director of Wallace House. For those of you for whom this is your first encounter with Wallace House, we are a program at the University of Michigan that's dedicated to supporting journalists in their craft. We have two programs, actually. The Knight Wallace Fellowships for Journalists, which is residential here at the university. We bring 20 journalists from around the country and world here to campus every year for an academic year of immersive study related to their work. We also have the Livingston Awards for young journalists. The shorthand that in the journalism world for the Livingstons is the Pulitzers for the young. It's a prize for excellence in journalism by reporters under the age of 35. We give 3 prizes every year, one for local reporting, one for national reporting, and one for international reporting. And for us here at the university, even though we work with journalists directly, we also take as central to our mission engaging the public in journalism, demystifying the work of journalism, and making sure that people understand the vital role that journalism plays in our democracy and the absolute necessity of press freedom. And so it's wonderful to see all of you here, slowly filling up even the balcony on a Thursday afternoon. So that is great to see. And we're going to get going, even as I see some people still coming in. We'd like to invite you to join the conversation for those of you on our live stream following and on social media, and for those of you in the room who would like to share the event with your friends and followers. You can use the hashtag Wallace House. You can also follow us by our handles. I'm at L. Clementson for Lynette Clementson, our speaker at Farenthold for David Farenthold, and at UM Knight Wallace, which is our handle for the Knight Wallace Fellowships program, and a good one to follow if you want to keep track of our events, because we have many good ones coming up over the course of the year. I'd love to thank our sponsors for this event. We believe that collaboration is important, both in our work as journalists and here at the university. And when we do events, partnering with other departments is a way of showing our connectedness and acknowledging that we need all of us to really inform the community. For this event, our partners are the Department of English Language and Literature, the Communication Studies Department, and the Gerald R. Ford School for Public Policy. I also am so grateful to see so many students in the audience today. We start every academic year with an event called the Hovey Lecture, named for Graham Hovey, the second director of the Knight Wallace Fellows Program. And at the end of the Hovey Lecture, I thanked people for coming, and for those of you who were at that event, I mentioned that for our future events, I would like to see more students involved, because I think it's a very important time to get young people engaged in journalism, in media literacy, in understanding how journalism works in our society. And this room is a testament to people being very good partners in that effort. We have undergraduate, graduate students, reporters from the Michigan Daily, and even high school students here. I know I'm missing some of the groups, but of the groups I know, we have students from the Communication Studies class, Communication Revolutions in the room. Students, you can cheer. Shout out to you. We have students from the Lloyd Hall Scholars Program journalism class. We have students from, this is a great class title, Rebel Reporters, Investigative Journalism and Social Change. One from a course, Spies, Traitors, and Heroes, The Ethics of Whistleblowing, and students from long-form journalism. And I specifically called out Skyline High School at the Hovey Lecture because they have a magnet program in communications, media, and public policy. And before I came in, I was aware that we had at least 16 students who got permission to be out of class for fifth period from Skyline to come to this event today. So shout out to the magnet school students who are here. And to the people who uphold journalism traditions on campus at the student level, it is always terrific to see our partners at the Michigan Daily. The Michigan Daily, if you follow them, their alumni, they have very famous alumni throughout the journalism world. And so those of you who are reporters with the Michigan Daily, we look forward to following you in future years as your careers get stronger, and we know they will. So when you came in, you got a couple of pieces of paper. One was this piece of paper here for questions. There will be Knight Wallace Fellows after David's talk who will be moving around the audience, and they'll pick up your questions. We'll make sure that the lights come up at some point so you can see to write your questions. And we'll have a time for a question and answer session with our speaker today. And with that, I would like to turn to the main event. And it's a good event today. Washington Post reporter David Fahrenthold won the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting for his work investigating the truth behind Donald Trump's philanthropy. The assignment started out in February 2016 as a little digging into the $6 million that Trump said he had raised for veterans. Over the next 9 months, Fahrenthold wrote more than 24 stories on the inconsistencies and gaps between then-candidate Trump's million-dollar claims and the reality of his charitable giving. Along the way, he stumbled on another turn in the story, an old tape from Access Hollywood, in which Trump was caught bragging in the lewdest of terms about groping women. At every turn, David brought readers along to participate in his reporting, posting pictures of his reporter's notebook on Twitter, revealing what information he was looking for, what he was finding, and most importantly, what he was having a hard time finding. As the months went on, his thousands of Twitter followers grew to tens of thousands as average citizens across the country provided crucial bits of information that pushed his reporting forward. The Fahrenthold notebooks became an actual thing that people followed on social media. In a world driven by techie tools and gadgets, David's dogged pen and paper reporting kept readers riveted and the Trump campaign on edge. In the midst of the campaign, as David's stories continued to roll out, then-candidate Trump referred to Fahrenthold as a, quote, nasty guy. Luckily, the Pulitzer Prize jurors disagreed, awarding David Fahrenthold the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for National Reporting and recognizing him, quote, for persistent reporting that created a model for transparent journalism in political campaign coverage. This past summer, the Newseum in Washington, D.C., put one of David's notebooks on display. I think you can still catch it there for anyone who's passing through D.C. In the next month or so. For journalists and news junkies, watching David at work became an obsession. And for reporters especially, he provided a useful template for how to use social media, a platform littered with landmines for journalists, to maximum reporting effect. Now, for those of you who may not have followed the entire series, I'd like to read just a bit from one of the 2016 stories that was part of the Pulitzer submission. This was a story, the reporting started in February. This was a story from late October that summed up the body of reporting. For as long as he has been rich and famous, Donald Trump has also wanted people to believe that he is generous. He spent years constructing an image as a philanthropist by appearing at charity events and by making very public, even nationally televised, promises to give his own money away. It was in large part a facade. A months-long investigation by the Washington Post has not been able to verify many of Trump's boasts about his philanthropy. Instead, throughout his life in the spotlight, Whether as a businessman, a television star, or as a political candidate, the Post found that Trump had sought credit for charity that he had not given or had claimed other people's giving as his own. If you have not read the series, it's definitely worth reading. David Fahrenthold started at the Post in 2000, covering the DC Police Department and crime in that city. After that, he served as the paper's New England correspondent and covered environmental issues before joining the political staff in 2010. A native of Houston and a fan of the Houston Astros, David has taken a break from the World Series and last night's heart-thumping roller coaster of a win by the Astros to join us here in Ann Arbor today. Please join me in welcoming David Fahrenthold.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me today, and thank you, Lynette, for the introduction and for letting me know that there are 16 people here, at least 16 people who are getting to miss class. It's a good thing to know. No matter how poorly I do today, at least 16 of you are going to go home happy. I want to tell you just a little bit about my experience last year covering Donald Trump and sort of the lessons that I've learned, or I think I've learned, three big lessons in particular about how to cover Trump, but how to cover news in general in a time when there's so much chaos in the world and so much news that our readers are trying to absorb and keep track of. Sort of three things that lessons I sort of stumbled upon last year that I'm now trying to sort of formalize and apply to journalism going forward. So as Lynette said, I've been at the Post for 17 years now, and I've covered all kinds of different things, but I started covering the 2016 campaign way back in 2014. So the first story I did of the 2016 campaign cycle was in late 2014 about then Republican frontrunner Chris Christie. We actually drove all around New Jersey and interviewed everyone Chris Christie had ever yelled at in public. It was a long couple of days. And I had, just as a way of explaining how I got to be covering Donald Trump, I spent a long time in 2015 writing about long shot loser candidates, people that I could get close to, but the reason you could get close to them was because nobody cared about them. So I wrote about Rick Santorum, Mike Huckabee, Rick Perry. Rick Perry, actually, I went to go see Rick Perry for a profile and he dropped out in the middle of the speech that I went to go see him give. I wrote I spent 3 weeks on a profile of Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana, it's amazing that anyone's invited me to address journalists after that decision. I spent 3 weeks writing a profile of Bobby Jindal. But the end result was we got to February of 2016, the Iowa caucuses, the day of the Iowa caucuses, and every candidate that I had covered, every candidate I was familiar with had already dropped out. And so there was nobody. I had nobody left. All my losers were gone. And so they said, well, we have people covering Trump, but go to Iowa and write about Donald Trump. Write about, in particular, this idea that this guy who'd been on the cover of Playboy twice, he'd been married 3 times, that he might win sort of this famously socially conservative state of Iowa, which in the end he didn't. He barely lost to Ted Cruz. But I ended up in Waterloo, Iowa, that day, on caucus day, seeing Trump do one of his last campaign appearances. And he did this thing that was really unusual, which was he stopped the campaign rally and he brought up a local veterans charity, a charity that helped veterans in Waterloo. And then he brought out this huge check, like a golf tournament-sized check. And the check said Donald J. Trump Foundation on the top. It was for $100,000, and Make America Great Again on the bottom, the campaign slogan. He gives it to this giant check to the Veterans Charity, and they say, thank you, Mr. Trump, good luck in the White House. They sit down again, and the rally resumes. That was odd. I'd never seen that before, and I thought it might even be illegal. And the answer is it basically is illegal to use your charity to boost your presidential campaign. But I left that event with what I thought was kind of a simple question, okay? Where did that money come from? And so the answer to that was that a few days earlier, Donald Trump had held he skipped a Fox News debate because he was having a feud with Fox News, as amazing as that sounds now. And he held his own telethon, like sort of a fundraiser for veterans to counter-program the Fox News debate that he wasn't in. And he said at that time that he'd raised $6 million for veterans, including $1 million that had come out of his own pocket. So $6 million total, $1 million from his own pocket. So that's what the money was from. This $100,000 I saw him give away, that's what the money was from. So I had a question that I didn't think was a life-changing question, and I didn't think was a story of more than a couple of days. The question I had was, okay, there was $6 million. I've seen what happened to $100,000 of it. Where's the rest? Where did it go? And I like that story because it was concrete. So much of covering Trump then and now is writing about his words. And are his words outrageous? Are his words truthful? Are his words meaningful? Are they worth reacting to in the way that we do? Everything about that is so slippery because it's so hard to tell what he actually means or whether he knows what he means. I like this story because it was concrete. There was money someplace. Somewhere there was $6 million, and it was going to go to somebody. And once we figured out where that money went, you could know something about Donald Trump. What were the choices that he made, about which charities he chose to support, and at what amounts. It was concrete, there were real facts involved, and you might learn something about his soul. How did he give away this money that he'd raised? So I thought, okay, well, I'll spend a couple of days on this. And I called the Trump campaign and said, hey, where did the rest of the money go? Now, I should say, one of the true handicaps that I have as a journalist is that I'm an optimist. I believe that people, just naturally, it's a natural instinct that people who say they're going to do something, I believe they're going to do it. I believe that, if someone promises something in public, I naturally believe, of course, they're going to follow through. So I've spent years as a political reporter, and this is a huge handicap because it means things always sneak up on me. I'm not prepared for people to break their promises. And in this case, I wasn't prepared for the answer. Trump's people, this story that I thought would be a couple of days, they couldn't tell me where the money went. They wouldn't tell me where the money went. And not for a day or a week or months. It went on several months trying to figure out what had become of this money that Donald Trump said he'd raised for veterans. And in particular, what had happened to the $1 million that he said was going to come out of his own pocket. Couldn't find any trace that it had been given away. So, I had tried all the sort of traditional methods of reporting. I had called every veterans advisor Donald Trump had. I'd called every veterans charity that seemed close to Donald Trump. I'd called all of his campaign managers, everybody else. I couldn't account for the money. I felt like I had done everything that traditional reporting would allow me to do, and I couldn't answer the question of where the money had gone. So then Corey Lewandowski, this is in May of last year, Corey Lewandowski, Trump's campaign manager, called me one day, and he said, okay, I can tell you that Donald Trump has given away the $1 million he promised from his own pocket. He's given that away to veterans. Great. To who? He says, well, I can't tell you who got it, or in what amounts, or when, anything else about it. It's all secret. Just trust me, Donald Trump has given this money away. So, you can't take someone's word like that for it. When we wrote a story saying that Corey Lewandowski had said that then I wanted a way of proving it, finding some evidence that it was true. And so, out of desperation, many great lessons are learned in desperation. Out of desperation, I tried something new, which was I opened my reporting process up. I used Twitter to try to find anybody who had gotten even $1 of this $1 million Trump said he'd given away. So the questions, I reached out to veterans charities, veterans advocates, veterans magazines, veterans, people like Sebastian Junger, the Perfect Storm author, who's now an advocate for veterans. Anybody that I thought would have an audience of veterans and said, look, I'm making this public plea. If you know anybody who got any of this money that @real Donald Trump has given away, let me know. And I didn't know sort of what I was doing then, but what I learned then was an important lesson. Once you've taken your reporting as far as it can go under traditional reporting methods, as I had, the next step is to open your reporting up. Show people what you're doing, what you know, what you don't know. In this case, I'm showing everybody, look, I'm trying to find evidence of this giving that Trump says he's given away. Thinking like it's possible. The worry in those situations is always that some other outlet's going to steal your story. But at that point, I had no other options. I'd be glad if somebody stole the story. At least we'd know the answer. So I spent a day searching on Twitter, and I reached a lot of people. I was really surprised by how many people saw my query. But everybody that I heard back from, every veterans group I heard back from, they said, no, we didn't get any money. We got nothing. And at the end of that day, I felt like this had been a huge waste of time. I felt like the world's oldest reporter. I was like, this social media is crap. People make it out like it's so great. I just spent a whole day tweeting into the ether, and I learned nothing. But it turned out that Donald Trump had been paying attention because he searches for his own name on Twitter, and I've been including his name in the queries. And it turned out that the reason that I couldn't find any evidence of the money he'd given away is because he hadn't given away the money. That night, after my day of searching in public, Donald Trump actually gave $1 million to veterans charities. And he called me the next day to say that he'd given it all away in one fell swoop, all $1 million to this veterans charity, the Marine Corps Law Enforcement Foundation, which was run by a friend of his who used to be an FBI agent. And I said, well, why did it take you so long to give this money away? You said back in January you were going to give away $1 million. Why are you just giving it away now in May? And he said, well, I had to vet the group that I gave it to. And this, I talked about how it's important, sort of the first lesson of this is to stretch your reporting as far as traditional reporting will let you. From my reporting, I knew that this group he gave the $1 million to, he said he had to vet. They, the year before, had given him a Man of the Year award. They had a whole gala at the Waldorf Astoria where they all wore tuxedos and talked about what a great guy Donald Trump is. They gave him an award like the size of like a credenza. It's a huge award. And I said, after that, you had to vet them? You had to vet this group after you spent a whole night with them last year? And he said, oh yeah, it's true. And I said, well, did you just give us money away because I was asking about it? And that's when he called me a nasty guy and didn't answer the question. So I learned 2 lessons in that. One, as I said, it's important to, before you ask the public's help, it's important to do all you can do as a journalist. Number 2, if you open up your reporting to the public, show them what you know and what you don't know, you invite in input, you invite people to come to you with their context, their knowledge, their suggestions. There's all kinds of things out there that readers know you don't know. And also, it's a way of making, so Donald Trump, when he didn't respond to my question or when he had Corey Lewandowski lie to me, he thought that a non-response would be the end of the story. And what I was doing on social media was making his non-response the subject of the story, right? It's not a way to shut down the story, it's a way to make this, it's a story in itself. And you can demonstrate to people how hard you're working to get around this. And in that case, compelled him to actually not only tell the truth, but to do the thing that he hadn't done yet. So after that, after this experience, Marty Baron, who's the Post's executive editor, the guy from Spotlight, who actually in real life is slightly more energetic than the guy in Spotlight, he said to me, well, listen, if Donald Trump was willing to try to basically weasel out of a commitment to veterans, the most venerated group in our society, while he was under the greatest spotlight that journalism has in America. There's no, other than perhaps dating Taylor Swift, there is no way to put yourself under a brighter media spotlight than to run for president and to succeed. Bobby Jindal never had much of a media spotlight beyond me, but to succeed, to become a major party nominee, there's nobody in America that gets more scrutiny. Under that level of scrutiny, under that microscope, he tried to get out of a $1 million promise to veterans. So Marty said, what was he doing before? What was he doing before when he was just a businessman and the only people who were there to fact check him was like Entertainment Tonight? Was he doing this before? Was he promising money to charity and then not giving it? So the response was the notebook, which I think we can see here. I made a list of every charity that I thought Donald Trump would have given money to. So he had been promising money to charity again and again and again through the course of his life. And there was very little evidence that he'd followed through. So I made a list of all the charities that I thought if any Donald Trump was going to give money to anybody, he would have given him money to these charities. And I started calling them and asking them, has Donald Trump ever given you money out of his own pocket? And I made a list because I wanted, again, to show readers how much I was doing to try to prove Donald Trump right, to invite their suggestions about what I should add into here, and also just to keep people engaged, keep people interested. That's the third point I wanted to make, is about giving readers a thread. So much of modern reporting is not, and modern journalism, the output of a reporter, is not just about reporting the news, it's about giving readers who've lost the thread a way to tie your stories together and a way to catch up with your stories if they've lost them. So when I started at the Post in 2000, we thought of our, who is our average reader? Who is our typical reader? It was somebody probably in the Washington area who sat down every morning with their cup of coffee and her cereal to read the paper on paper. And that person, you had their undivided attention. You could guide them from story to story, but you could show your judgment by putting what was on the front page, putting something on the front page versus inside A. Then as we became sort of a more digital operation, you imagine your typical consumer being somebody who was sitting down at their desk and goofing off at work, but again, with a cup of coffee and your web page. You had their undivided attention. Now, when I imagine my typical consumer, my reader, I imagine someone who's been, like one of those stories you read where someone gets sucked up in a tornado. Like imagine someone who's been sucked up in a tornado and spat out the other side. They're going to be discombobulated, covered in garbage. They're going to completely lost wherever they were before. That's anybody, any of your readers stepping into the daily news now. When they get spat out the other side, they forget what they had for breakfast this morning. They forget certainly anything they've read that you've done. So you have to think about ways of letting them follow the story along with you and not count on them to remember the context. So this is a way of doing it. Nothing in your social media feed looks like this. At least it didn't then. Whenever you see this notebook go by, you say, oh yeah, it's the Notebook guy. I remember what he's doing. I remember what he's looking at. And the notebook changes. As the reporting went on, I filled in this sheet to show which charities had said they never got money from Trump, which charities said they didn't, that they had, and did it in sort of color-coded ink. So every time you looked at it, you could see me working. You could see my reporting changing. And so by doing it this way, we built this audience. People started paying attention, wanting to sort of see what was happening next. And every time a story, an individual story spun out of this, I would tweet out the story and a picture of the page of the notebook that charity was on. Just to give you a sense of, okay, I'm reading this one particular thing, but it's connected to a broader story that I can follow. And we also started writing content, graphics and stories, Q&As, that were designed for people who had missed the first 6 months of this reporting, or who had paid attention, lost the thread, and wanted to come back. Here's how to help yourself sort of get back into the story. And in doing this, in creating this thread that people could follow, the reader interaction I was talking about earlier only increased. We had these incredible instances where things that I thought were impossible to get, facts I thought were just ungettable, were gettable because I was reaching an audience of people, and somewhere in that audience was somebody who had the context I needed. I'll give you two brief examples. One of them, we figured out from calling one of these charities that Donald Trump had once used. So Trump had something called the Donald J. Trump Foundation. It's a charity, a small charity he'd set up, filled with other people's money, and he would often use the money in that charity to buy things for himself, which you're not supposed to do. That's one of the cardinal rules of a charity is even if your charity has your name on it, Donald J. Trump Foundation, the David A. Fahrenthold Foundation, it's not your money. It's a charity's money, so you can't use it to buy things for yourself. But he did. And so one of the things we were trying to find was Trump had once used the money in this charity to buy a $10,000 portrait of himself. He paid $10,000 for it. I don't know if it was actually worth $10,000. But we needed to know where this portrait was. That matters, right? Because if the charity bought the portrait, the charity's money paid for it, then the charity owns it and has to be, under tax law, has to be used for charitable purposes. So if it's hanging on the wall of a children's hospital, or if it's hanging on the wall of a homeless shelter, that's an acceptable use. If it's hanging on the wall of Donald Trump's house, it's not. So I need to know where that portrait is. Now, in the old days, how would I have done that? I would have hired freelancers to go to all the Trump properties that are open to the public and sort of look around on the walls. But a lot of the Trump properties are closed to the public, and his house is obviously closed to the public. Even if I'd sent freelancers to all those places, it would have cost a lot of money, it would have taken a lot of time, and I still wouldn't have known for sure. So what I did was just ask my Twitter followers, which at this point had grown from like 4,500 to 70,000. I said, I'm looking for this portrait. I tweeted out a picture of the portrait. And, but I had no, as I said, my thought about how to find this was going to be long, time consuming, expensive, and maybe not work. One of my readers in Atlanta, a woman named Allison Aguilar, who I've never met, had an idea that I never would have thought of. She said, I'll look at TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor, for those of you who've used it, it allows people to post all kinds of photos of any resort they go to. So she goes to Trump's golf course at Doral, it's a resort outside Miami. And there's 500 user-generated photos. I mean, it's like people's bathrooms, like the fruit section of the buffet. It's stuff that you think, why would anyone ever take pictures of this or think people would want to see it? But anyway, there's 500 photos. She scrolls down through them, 300 photos in, she finds a picture of the portrait that I'm looking for hanging on the wall of the sports bar at this resort. So wow, the picture's dated February 2016. This is September 2016 at this point that we're doing this story. She sends it to me. Look, I found this picture of the portrait hanging on the wall at Doral 7 months ago. So okay, we know where it was. We need to know where it is. So I was thinking, and this was late at night, I was like, okay, well, I'll just hire a freelancer in the morning. That same night, a guy named Enrique Acevedo, who is an anchor at Univision in Miami, sees my tweet. Univision studios are 4 blocks away from Doral. His newscast goes from 11:30 to midnight. He makes a reservation that night. He uses points. He doesn't use money because he doesn't want to pay Trump any money. He goes there and arrives at like 12:30 at night, checks in. The place is all sort of shutting down, but he convinces the cleaning crew to let him into the sports bar and finds this portrait hanging on the wall. Takes a picture of it. So now a journalist has found this thing. It's not, a fellow journalist has found this thing hanging on the wall, breaking the law. So that would have taken weeks in the old days, or at least days. It took 14 hours from not knowing where in the world this thing was to seeing it on the wall, breaking the law. Just as an aside, the Trump campaign's official explanation for that was that, yes, it may seem that the Trump Foundation did a favor for the Trump sports bar by buying art for their wall, but actually it's the opposite. Really, the Trump sports bar is doing the charity a favor by storing its art collection on the wall. So you have to report these things out. So I called a tax law expert and explained this rationale about the sports bar doing the charity a favor. And he said, it's really hard to make an IRS auditor laugh. But that would do it. The other amazing thing was I discovered from some old tax documents that the Trump Foundation, the smallest donation in the history of the Trump Foundation was $7, a $7 gift to the Boy Scouts in 1989. You know there's got to be a story there, right? There's got to be something, why would he give a $7 grant to the Boy Scouts? But Trump wouldn't talk to me, the Boy Scouts wouldn't talk to me. It was so long ago, I figured this was just lost to history. This was an unanswerable question. And so I just tweeted it out, not even asking for help, just saying, let's all imagine what weird story is here, but we can't answer it. Readers, again, having context that I didn't have, just take this as a challenge. And I'm watching this happen in front of me, with basically no input from me at all. Somebody says, well, maybe it's popcorn. Those of you who've been Boy Scouts know the Boy Scouts sell terrible, terrible popcorn that their parents buy out of guilt. And they said, well, how much did a tin of crappy popcorn cost in 1989? And so the crappy popcorn company is on Twitter, and someone tweets at Trails End Popcorn, hey, how much did a tin of... So some social media intern at Trails End Popcorn is stunned at this attention and says, no, a tin of popcorn was $5 in 1989. Okay, we'll discard that. Another reader finds a newspaper ad, digitized newspaper from 1989 on Google, and one of the ads, which is digitized, says, sign your son up for the Boy Scouts this fall. Registration for the year is only $7. So this is 2 years after Donald Trump wrote a book saying that he had so much money he could not use anymore. And he used the charity's money, apparently, to pay for his son's registration with the Boy Scouts. It's the year that Donald Trump Jr. turned 11. Something that if it had not been for me opening up my reporting and asking for help, I never would have gotten those things. So flash forward a little bit. The Access Hollywood story happened, and I can talk more about that later if you'd like. Donald Trump won the election. You guys may be aware of that. So now we are in a new era, in a new challenge. For me, the story now is writing about Trump's conflicts of interest, his businesses, his hotels, his golf courses, and the conflicts of interest they pose for him as president. So the challenge for me was to think about whether those 3 lessons that I learned last year could be applied to a new set of facts and outside this sort of hyper intensive atmosphere of a presidential campaign. So the answer is they can be. I've tried to use these 3 techniques so far this year, I think with some success. The hardest part, again, has been pushing my reporting, the first step, pushing my traditional reporting as far as it would go. So that's been using public information requests, Instagram searches, interviews, everything I can to establish who Donald Trump's customers are, how his businesses work, whether they're gaining business or losing business. That's been a long and difficult process, and it's required a huge amount of information organizing and storage, which is, I'd be glad to talk more about that later. That's one of the hardest things I've had to do this year, is to keep track of information about thousands of golf club members, hundreds of customers, all these different reports on revenues, things like that. But as I've pushed out the traditional reporting, I've been able to go to the public and say, look, I've done 90% of the work, but I need you for the last 10%. And so we've opened up our reporting on things like this Time magazine cover. If you guys recall, Trump had someone, I can't say that he had done for himself, but a bunch of Trump's clubs had a fake Time magazine posted on the wall that's saying, it's like from 2009, at one of his low points in his life, which was like, Donald Trump is hitting on all cylinders. Everything is great with Donald Trump. Not like any Time magazine you've ever seen, right? When does Time magazine write a story, have a cover that's like, this guy, things are great for him, 100%, everything's great. That's what the Time magazine about him was. And so we opened it up and said, listen, here's where we found it in a couple of places. You readers, do you know where else it could be? And within a day, we had like 5 other people from other newspapers and other readers calling in to tell us where else this fake Time magazine cover had been. And the other technique I've tried to use is giving people this thread to follow. So one really good story we've been working on using this technique with was Mar-a-Lago. Obviously, you're aware Trump has this club in Florida where one of the big businesses it does is renting out its ballroom to sort of big charity galas. He can make as much as like $275,000 in a night from one of these charity galas. So after Charlottesville, when Trump said there were, quote, very fine people among those people demonstrating to save a Confederate statue, these charities start quitting. And we want to give people a way to follow that story. Because it's every day there's a new charity that quits, there's a new controversy. So we were able to sort of employ a lot of the same techniques. Actually, I wound up writing my speech on part of one of those notebooks, writing out a list of charities that had events at Mar-a-Lago and then crossing them off as they cancel. That's something where, again, the list changes. It's not just a static list, it's a list that changes. So if you're trying to catch up on this story, you can watch it unfold in real time, and we give you sort of an anchor, an image that anchors you, so you know you're watching this story that you're interested in. So the last thing I want to say before I take questions is the one thing in all of this that I tried to keep in mind as I've tried to adapt my reporting to the era of Trump, to the unique challenge of covering a businessman who still owns a business in the White House to covering a guy who was at times a tenuous relationship with the truth. The thing that I've tried to keep track of all the time is the idea that we have to reject as journalists this image you get from Trump and from Steve Bannon and other people that we in the media and Donald Trump are at war with one another. That we are the opposition party, we are the enemy of the people, or the enemy of Donald Trump. That's what Bannon and Trump would like us to be. It'd be the worst thing in the world if we embrace that identity. Because if you're in a war with somebody, what do? You break rules, you cut corners. All that matters is winning. The only thing we have the thing that gives us meaning and value is our credibility and the idea that we follow our rules about objectivity and proof and fairness in every situation. And to embrace, even for a moment, the idea that we're in some sort of war with the White House is to give people permission, tacit or maybe not tacit, to break some of those rules that make us valuable to society and give us an audience. So the maxim that Marty Baron, our executive editor, has used, and I think it's the right one, is to say, we're not at war, we're just at work. I've tried to sort of live that out, and I hope that I hope that I can keep doing it, and I hope that other people in journalism will follow it too. So with that, I will take questions. Thanks. For the Skyline High students, was that better than 5th period? I hope so.
So you'll see fellows walking around. If you have a card with a question on it, if you raise your hand, somebody will pick up your card, and we'll make sure that your question is asked. And you can also tweet your questions, yes. Yes, using the hashtag Wallace House so that we'll see it. I'm going to turn things over briefly to Jen Guerra. She's a Knight Wallace Fellow this year. Some of you may know Jen as a reporter on Michigan radio, and we feel like she has a voice that we all like, and so we'll have her ask the questions to David, and if we can bring up the lights just a little bit, that would be terrific.
I've asked Jen to do different voices for every question, but that request may not be granted.
All right. Oh, we've got a lot of questions. This is great. Okay, thank you. And we are going to start with the students at Skyline. Shout out to the students at Skyline. Okay. This is asked about 3 different times on 3 different pieces of paper. So they want to know specifically about the career of a journalist. So how much, education is needed to be a journalist, and then the difference between journalism and blogging. That comes up about 4 different times. So take it away.
Well, first of all, journalism is the greatest job in the world. I have I didn't think I wanted to be a journalist going into college. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. But after having done it for a while, it ruins your attention span in a way that doesn't allow you to do any sort of long-term work again. But the thing I loved about it was the ability it's a license to follow your curiosity and to follow your outrage. If you're curious about how something works, if you're curious about what people are doing, if you're outraged about something that's happening in the world, you think it's wrong, it's a license to go ask questions and figure it out. It's not a license to vent your opinions about something without really knowing, but it's a great license to go chase your curiosity, and I've always loved that. The question about education, I think there are a lot of things that are really valuable about journalism education now, and if I was a student now, I would want to know how to code, I would want to know how to do sort of computer-assisted reporting. Even simple things, I think they're simple, like scraping websites, scraping social media. We have people at the Post who know how to do that, and I really rely heavily on them. But the most important thing is to do it. The most important education in journalism is to go out and do it. So to find a way to write for pay or for free, to report whatever your medium is, to get a chance to do it and to be around people who are good at it. So much of journalism, I think, is sort of an oral tradition. You have to be around people who are doing it to know how to do it well and to sort of pick up lessons about both how to be fair and also how to be thorough. So my advice is to try to find as many chances as you can to be around journalists and to do journalism with an editor, to do journalism with somebody who will give you feedback on what you're doing. But if you can get into it, and I think it's increasingly a better job market than it was, I would have to say there's no, what did H.L. Mencken say? It's truly the life of kings. I've always loved it. And I'm glad that I still get to do it.
Okay, this is another question. This is not a Skyline question. So it's somebody else, but I don't have any other information on that. Can you speak about breaking the story on Access Hollywood about Trump and Billy Bush admitting to groping women, et cetera, et cetera?
The beginning of that is that this was not something that we knew existed beforehand. We had spent a lot of time looking for what may be totally non-existent tapes from The Apprentice. There were all these rumors about Apprentice tapes that would show Trump saying racist comments or sexist comments or something that we chased for a long time and couldn't find. And I'm not even sure really exists because the people you'd find who claimed to have seen it, well, they hadn't really seen it. They just heard about it from somebody. The most reliable source on that was Tom Arnold, Roseanne Arnold's former husband, who was not very reliable. So we had not been looking for an Access Hollywood tape. We didn't know that an Access Hollywood tape existed until we basically had it. For me, we had got it about 11 o'clock in the morning on a Friday, and the video people, the Post's video department said, well, listen, we need to talk to our lawyers about whether we can really use this because it was obviously made for an NBC show. We need to we need to sort of edit it in some ways so that it's a 5-minute video, but only the first 3 minutes are interesting, the last 2 minutes are boring. They're just like a tour. Trump gets at the back lot. So cut that off. We need to subtitle it because it's sort of too soft to hear in some places. All of that, they said, okay, it's 11 o'clock now. We can have it done by 3:30. So prepare to write the story, to have the story come out at 3:30 when the video's out. Because you couldn't have the story without the video, obviously. So my job was to write the story, which actually was not that hard because it was mostly just a transcript of the tape, and to call all those people involved. So we called NBC because Access Hollywood was an NBC show. We asked them, basically the point was to say, are you going to say this is a hoax, or are you going to say you're going to sue us for using it? And NBC chose not to comment. They didn't say either one of those things, but they didn't comment on the record at all. I called Billy Bush, or I called Billy Bush's spokesperson, who did not comment at all either. And then, really funny experience, there's 2 women who are sort of tangentially involved in that video. There's the Ariane Zucker, who's the soap opera actress that Trump and Bush are sort of ogling out the window of the bus. And there's Nancy O'Dell, Billy Bush's co-host in Access Hollywood, that they're talking about in the beginning. So I had experience with Washington publicists or Washington public relations people. And so what I was used to was like, okay, you couldn't right now get Chuck Schumer on the phone whenever you wanted, or I couldn't at least, but I could get Chuck Schumer's spokesperson on the phone pretty fast, and within a day. In Hollywood, apparently, it's a grievous loss of face for the spokesperson if you were able to speak to them on the same day that you call them. It shows how unimportant they are if the publicist has time to return your phone call the day that you called. So I call the soap opera actress's publicist, who's, I guess, used to talking to like Soap Opera Digest. And I was like, listen, I'm going to try to, like, do you have any idea what is about to happen? Let me try to explain to you, like, the presidential candidate has said this about your client. She's about to be in the news. Like, do you have any idea? And she didn't get it. She kept being like, oh, I'll call you back next week. I said, no, we don't have next week. It has to be today. And then finally I was like, look, I'm going to send you a transcript of what Donald Trump says about your client, okay? So I send her the transcript of the tape. And she writes back, you're welcome. Who knows? I was like, okay, we're just gonna have to write that person off. She does not understand what was going on here. So that left Trump. We sent, at first, the Trump campaign, we wanted to ask them the same question we asked NBC. Are they gonna say this is a hoax? Because obviously the part where Trump says the most offensive things, you can't see his mouth moving. You just see the bus. He's on the bus talking, and you see him get off the bus later, but you don't see his mouth moving when he says those things. So we sent Trump's people a transcript of what he said. And they came back to us and said, well, that doesn't sound like Mr. Trump. That doesn't sound like something he would say. Can you send us the video? So we debate with the editors for a little bit about sending the video. And finally we do. We send them the video. And we tell them, okay, that's like 3:30 in the afternoon now. We say, okay, we'll move this deadline back to 4. But we and the editors and the lawyers and everybody else have looked at this and decided that it's legitimate. We believe it's really him. We believe that it's a real thing. We're going to publish at 4 o'clock. So the Trump campaign you can be part of this story, you can have a comment, or you can not, but the story is going to publish. So while we're waiting for them to respond at 4 o'clock, the last real challenge is the curse words. So newspapers are very Victorian in this way. If you're going to use any sort of curse word, it requires 17 levels of approval in the story. I mean, obviously you can't just write it in your own voice, but if you're going to quote someone saying a curse word, you basically have to get Jeff Bezos to sign off. And so that's usually so a few times in my career, times that I was quite proud of, I managed to get curse words into the paper, but it required a huge amount of effort. This was all the curse words. This was every vulgar term you could possibly imagine in one story. And they had been, and you couldn't say they were unimportant. They were said by a person running for president. So that took like a good hour to go back through and negotiate which of the words we would spell out, which of the words we would just, we would have a dash, dash, dash. And when people understand what that was, that consumed most of the editing time was figuring out the curse words. And it involved like dispatching editors to ask other editors about particular curse words. Anyway, it was like that George Carlin routine, except worse words. Anyway, at 4 o'clock, the Trump people haven't called. So that was the deadline we set. The story's ready to go. Editors have signed off on it. We believe it's true. We're going to publish. And so the editor who has the authority to push the button is walking from my desk to her desk to just push the button and publish it. It's a journey of about 30 feet, about halfway the distance between me and the back of this room. In the middle of that walk, which takes 5 seconds, the Trump people called. And said, wait, don't publish. It's him. We admit it. It's all locker room talk. Bill Clinton has said worst him on the golf course, blah, blah, blah. But they admitted that it was him, which I didn't expect. Trump had basically not admitted. I mean, you all saw the same campaign I did. He didn't admit to anything last year, but he admitted to this. And so we added that to the story and published it. The whole time we were worried that NBC was going to beat us because it's obviously their footage originally. It must have been in their vault someplace. And because we'd called them for comment, somebody would have known that we had the same story. So our story publishes at like 4:02, and they published their story at 4:06. So it's the best feeling in the world to have beaten them and then immediately not be out on a limb. The story's backed up by the ultimate authority, NBC, which owns Access Hollywood, but we were first. Until that day, the most viewed story in the history of the Washington Post had been a story about a lady in Burundi who'd faked her own death and then showed up to scare everyone at her funeral. Not anymore. I knew the story was going to be well read and people were going to be interested in it. I didn't write it thinking like, I'm going to take out Donald Trump. This is going to be the end of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. He had survived so many other things. I didn't think of it in those terms. It briefly looked like it might be. For a couple days afterwards, so many Republicans deserted him. Jason Chaffetz, the House Oversight Committee chair, famously said, I'm out. I can't look my teenage daughter in the eye anymore if I support this man. But within a couple of weeks, Chaffetz and nearly all of them had come back to the fold. So my original expectation that it would not be a race-changing story, I think, was accurate. It's a long-winded answer.
Okay, this is from a student at U of M in the whistleblower class. They want to know, how do you know to trust the people that are helping you out on Twitter?
That's a great question. By the way, I love the name of that class. They're naming classes like action movies here. I really like that. I worry a lot about that question. You're taking input from the public and relying on it. The answer is that I try to make myself the filter between anything coming in and anything that goes out from me, either as a social media tweet, or a social media posting, as a story. Anything else, like anything that comes in from the public through Twitter or some other method is a tip, but I have to verify it the way I would verify anything else. So we get lots of stuff people send us that we can't prove through traditional journalism methods, and you just have to leave those things to the side. You can't retweet them, or you can't write about them. This is a difficult area to work in, just because often there's such a huge volume of tips coming in, and people expect results. Like if they send you tips, they want to see that their tips made a difference. But you can't give up the gatekeeper role, and you have to have somebody who understands libel, somebody who understands the rules of evidence, somebody who understands the practices of journalism, standing between the tips coming in and the information going out. As an example of how people are trying to deal with this. Earlier this year, another news outlet tried to crowdsource an examination of Trump's inaugural donors. The inauguration committee has to release name, address, and dollar amount of all of its donors. And so they said, we're going to put up a public-facing spreadsheet, like a Google Doc that anybody can look at, and we're going to list everybody, all these donors, name, address, dollar amount. And we want you readers to pick a name off the list and just see, well, okay, does the name match the address? And if it does, what can we learn about this person? Is this person the chairman of RGR Nabisco? Is this person like the president of Romania? Is it, these people foreigners? Are they Americans? And so they had set up this system where people, readers would choose a name and they would send in their observations to a set of, this publication had deputized like some super readers, like 15 readers that they thought were like especially well qualified. And those people were supposed to sort through the tips because it was too many tips for the reporter dealing with it, and then put them into the Google Doc. So the regular readers couldn't input things directly into the Google Doc, but these super readers could. The problem with that is those super readers they're not journalists, and they don't understand libel. Haven't spent years sort of understanding, how to prove a lead. And so things would happen where like somebody would say, David Fahrenthold, I found on Google there's a guy named David Fahrenthold who looks like he's in the mafia. And so then the super readers would write in the little public-facing spreadsheet, looks like he might be in the mafia. And that's bad. You shouldn't do that. Even though it's not a publication, it wasn't that news outlet's publication. They didn't put it on their own website and publish it. They created this Google Doc. It has their imprimatur. If there's an indication on there that somebody might be a member of the mafia, which, again, we really don't ever deal in might be members of the mafia. You really have to know. If somebody sued them because you called them a possible member of the mafia, that publication could be on the hook. They could say, well, you didn't write this, but you created it. So it's very important for me to, sometimes it's time consuming, and sometimes it means there's tips that come in that you can't prove, but whatever comes out, from social media or my stories, I have to stand behind the way I stand behind any other story. Okay,
this is from the New York Times deputy climate editor, who's apparently following this on Twitter. They write, the jokes about fake news, do you laugh them off, or do you see them as chipping away at the industry's credibility?
Both, I think. They are chipping away at our credibility. It's enormously damaging that we have a president and a party who is using the platform of the presidency to say that news he doesn't like is fake. There's no getting around that. That's a terrible precedent to set. It's a terrible thing to tell people, especially because Donald Trump himself doesn't believe it. Nobody consumes more news media than Donald Trump. The rest of you have never in your life consumed as much cable television and news coverage in any day as Donald Trump does every day. That's his life is spent watching television and reading Twitter and reading newspaper stories about himself. He cares deeply about what the news media says. There's nothing that matters more to him than what the New York Times in particular thinks of him. So the idea that the news is fake is something he's telling the public, but he doesn't believe himself. And I think in his mind, It's just a tactic. He doesn't really believe it. But a lot of people believe it, and that's enormously damaging, not just to our credibility as the news media, but to the society. To society. You would not want to live in a society where half the public doesn't believe that any news is trustworthy, or that their barometer for what news is trustworthy is news that fits my pre-existing view of the world. You wouldn't want a world where liberals live like that or where conservatives live like that. That said, there's not much I can do about what Donald Trump says. I can't stop him from saying it. Our role as journalists is to recognize that people that think that news is fake, we may have one chance to impress them, right? There may be one chance that those people will read one of our stories, that they'll come to our website, that they'll listen to our news program, where we have to think of them as consumers, and you have to do things in your stories and in your broadcasts that show people why what you do is better and more trustworthy. So that includes some of the things I was talking about, like opening up your journalism, people who pay attention on social media, showing them the steps along the way. I think they trust the final product more when they've seen and been able to sort of challenge the steps along the way. But it also involves the way you write your story, or the way you write your radio broadcast, which is things that we take for granted, right? We take for granted that if we're the Washington Post, we're trustworthy. So if we say this is sources at the White House said X, you should believe us, but these people don't, or they don't have any experience with us. They don't know from our name that we're trustworthy. They don't believe it. So how do you put in your stories evidence? Sort of how do you add things to your story that make your story more credible, that show the underlying bones of your reporting? So we've started doing that in things like, not sources of the White House said, but 17 sources of the White House said, 25 sources of the White House said. Adding in things like that, including links to documents, doing things in your broadcast that allow people to see your work, and also to be conscious of the things that you might be doing in the tone of your stories, and the tone of your tweets, the tone of your, that would turn people off, that would make people believe from the outset that you're out to get Donald Trump, or that you're out to get Hillary Clinton, or whoever. To be conscious of that and to think about our tone from their perspective. Not changing the story, not changing the truth, but changing the way we tell it in a way that if you come to us for the first time thinking we might be fake, you're going to keep reading and you're going to trust what we're doing. I think that's the thing we have the power to do.
That's great. There was this very specific question about tone, and you just answered it. So next one. This is from a student in Will Potter's Rebel Reporting class.
Another great name.
Another great title. What advice do you have for aspiring journalists?
Two things. One would be to think of, and I think journalists graduating college today are much better at this than I ever was, but to think of yourself as a project manager. You as a reporter now, like when I graduated college, they'd send me, there was some police story somewhere in DC, they would send me out to it. My responsibility was to do the reporting, come back and write the story. And maybe I might tell the photo desk where to go. But those were the only two elements of the story, written and photo. And so I didn't really have to be the boss of anybody but myself. And in fact, that's why I like journalism. I don't want to be anybody's boss. But in that way, I got to live in an era where you'd report, and then when you were going to write, especially a long story, you'd sort of shut out the world and say, okay, I'm here to write. Don't bother me, I'm writing. That's not the way it works now. Any story you're involved in is going to have a photo component, a video component. It may have some sort of interactive component. There's a team of people that are going to be involved in any story that's bigger than a brief. And part of the job of a reporter now, if you're the person who's the subject matter expert, the person who knows the story well, is going to be to keep those people included, keep them in the loop, keep them working on the same topic, and to make sure that their work is as good as possible, because their work is as important to what the reader sees as yours is. The graphic they do, the explainer video, the photo are going to be as important to the reader's experience and the reader's knowledge as your story or your radio piece. So to be conscious of that, you're never going to be able to just be a solo artist and shut out the world. You're always going to have to keeping people moving on the same topic. So to practice that in your experience as a student journalist. That's one thing. The other thing is to take advantage of the fact that you're at a university that will teach you things like coding, scraping, computer skills, multimedia skills. It's really hard to learn that on the job. And I know a lot of people at the Post who spent a ton of money going back to master's degree programs to learn how to code or to learn how to do multimedia. So take advantage of that, because those skills are going to make you tremendously more valuable later on, and it's really hard to learn them when you already have a job in journalism doing one particular thing.
Were you ever criticized by colleagues for opening up your reporting to social media?
Not to my face. Not really. The first day when I first posted this on Twitter, I went over to the guy who runs the main Post Twitter account, and I was like, hey, I'm going to post a picture of my notebook on Twitter. Can you guys retweet it from the main account? And to them, this was like the dumbest thing any person had ever done. This was like Amish tweeting. You know, you take a picture of a notebook. And so they really didn't want to do it. As far as the concern about was I going to open myself up to to competition, to other people, people may have worried about that, and I worried about it too. But on the one hand, I really had exhausted all my other ways of figuring some of these things out. I didn't have a way of doing this story except by asking for help. And two, I wanted other people on this story. I mean, and I still do. Like the Mar-a-Lago conflict of interest business story, I want to get beat on that story. I want other people chasing the same thing, because the more people that are on it, the more you know, the deeper you can get into the story, and also the more focused it's on it. So much of this is about getting the readers focused, getting the audiences focused, getting television to focus on it. And if it's just me as a lonely crusade doing this thing, you know, one story every couple of weeks, it's never going to get that kind of critical mass. But if you get a bunch of people on it breaking stories, there's going to be more attention paid to it. And, so people will learn more about it, and you'll know more. I've really tried this year. This year I get beat all the time because there's people in Palm Beach particularly, and in New York as well, who know these Trump properties really well, much better than I do. They beat me all the time, and the answer for me is to like, that's great. I'm going to retweet you. I'm going to aggregate you. I'm going to give you all the credit, because I want I want my readers to see what you've done, and I want you to keep going. There's the Palm Beach Daily News, which is like the society newspaper in Palm Beach. They're always going to know more about Mar-a-Lago than I am. So if I want my readers to know about Mar-a-Lago, I want them to see what the Palm Beach Daily News is doing. And I want us to feel like we're competing, but we're all also sort of driving at the same story. So if in this year it's invited more, it's been more people have scooped me, I think, because I've opened myself up. But that's fine. I hope they keep doing it, because I think I want there to be more than just me on the story.
We have a couple questions about media literacy. So the one I'll read is from a lecturer in communication studies at U of M, and he asks, how can the public avoid being misled by false news reports?
Oh, this is really hard. It's a really hard question, because there's the gatekeepers in this are not us, obviously. It's people like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, people that, we all know people like that last year and this year who were, earnestly believe in some obviously stupid wrong thing that they found on Facebook or Twitter from one side or the other. One really great example of that on my particular beat, y'all may have seen this, I think it was last week or the week before, a random person I'd never heard of before, tweeted out a picture of a flyer that they said their friend had gotten when they checked into the Trump Hotel in DC, which was like, it looked like a ransom note. It was all kinds of like crazy different typefaces, and it was like, supposedly the check-in people at the Trump Hotel had given them this flyer and said, here, sign this petition calling for like the banning of CNN from TVs in federal offices or something. Who knows? And so one random person retweets it, and there's no proof to that. And nobody even, I think the people who were retweeting it, even people in media retweeted it. So it's like thousands and thousands of tweets. All like Alyssa Milano was weighing in, like, is this real? And all these people are seeing this thing and believing it might be true, and nobody checks it out. Of course it's wrong. It's false. There's no way the Trump Hotel prints anything that's not written in gold script. Okay, I know enough about the Trump Hotel. They don't do black letters. It's all script. So if they're going to have a petition against CNN, it's going to be a higher class petition than that. So it's so hard to stop things like that, especially when the correction gets 1/1000th the attention that the original wrong story did. The way that I've tried to do my little part of it, I think Facebook and Twitter are trying to do something. I think they should do a lot more. I think they have a responsibility, a moral responsibility that comes with their reach and the way they want to unite the world, to not be have the world be united in believing in false conspiracy theories. But the thing that I've tried to do in my social media presence is not to retweet wrong things thinking that I'm debunking them. You guys see this all the time. Trump will tweet out something that's totally wrong, or somebody else will retweet something that's wrong, and a bunch of other people will quote tweet it, retweet it, and then say this is so dumb. I can't believe you said this. You're spreading the false rumor. You're spreading the falsehood. you're passing the falsehood on to more people. And yes, you're doing it in the context of saying that it's wrong, but you're putting the wrong thing in front of all the people who've trusted you with their attention and their eyeballs. Don't do it. I just don't do it at all. Like, if Trump says something that's wrong, I just ignore it. Because I don't want to be in the position of passing on something that's incorrect, even if I think I'm shooting it down. And I think I've tried to do that, to think about the way that I, in my own little way, am a publisher, and to try to not pass on false information to people, to make sure that whatever people get out of my Twitter feed, even if it's something I'm retweeting, is accurate.
Okay, this is from the Michigan Daily senior news editor, Timothy. He wants to know, now that Donald Trump is president and has the keys to the kingdom, is reporting on him easier or harder?
It's not, I think it's about the same. It's definitely not harder. I had thought that it was going to be harder. I thought that there would be more, the Trump White House, and I think they had this in their power if they'd known how to use their power. I thought that it would be much harder to report about things that they do. My reporting on the Trump organization is the same as my reporting on the Trump campaign. They just don't respond to me at all. There's another guy who works for the Post who they like a little better than me because they knew him from the Trump Hotel before Trump ran for president. And so sometimes he can call them and say, like, hey, listen, that Farenthold guy is out of control. You know, what would really get him and really make him angry is if you responded to his questions. And that usually doesn't work. But they usually don't respond. I don't cover the White House or the administration that much, and so it's hard to know. You know, they sometimes respond to my questions, but I think the part where it's gotten harder is people who cover the agencies, like the EPA, HUD. You know, those people could be hostile under the Obama administration, but I think they're more hostile now. In my own life, what I cover, the Trump people just choose generally not to respond to my questions, and that's the same as it was. One interesting sidelight to that was last year there was a particular episode where I wrote the story about the Trump Foundation, the charity, and I had sent this long list of very detailed questions to the Trump campaign about that, for that story, and they didn't respond. You know, I gave them a number of reminders, they didn't respond. They were not responding on purpose. So then the story comes out, and they took the answers to the questions that I had asked for. They took the answers they didn't give me, and they gave them to CNN. And then CNN had me on Anderson Cooper, and then one of their investigative reporters was like, well, we found some problems in your reporting. You didn't report on this or this or this that the Trump organization says is true. So apparently this is something Trump used to do to play the New York tabloids off one another. He would, if one was writing a story about him, he would give the answers to the other one, so the other one could embarrass the first. So what I started doing was then tweeting out my questions. Because in the story we would just say, the Trump campaign did not respond to requests for comment. And I think when readers read that, they think they imagine a 1930s movie or whatever, where you're they're walking the perp by and you're like, do you have any comment? That's it. They think that's you just yelled at them and they didn't respond, and that was it. But in these instances, I'm giving them, it's like a 2-page long email of all very detailed instances. I found this to be true. Why was that? Tell your side of the story. It's very, very detailed. And so I want to give people a sense from my social media, look, if they didn't respond, here's all the ways I gave them to tell their side of the story. It wasn't just that I wrote them, I sent them a blank email and wanted them to write me back. So that's one way I tried to respond to that last year. They haven't tried that again, but they might in the future.
Okay, we have several questions about the Washington Post specifically, so we'll start with this one. The owner of Amazon now also owns the Washington Post. So is this a conflict of interest?
It's a good question. I don't cover Amazon, so I can't stand here and tell you that it doesn't affect our, I don't know about whether it affects our coverage of Amazon. I don't think it does. I've never heard, you think if Jeff Bezos had called us up to kill a story about Amazon or change a story about Amazon, everyone in the newsroom would have heard that, and I have never heard that. I think our coverage of Amazon has been great. The instances where I've had contact with Bezos, there was a time, particularly after the election, when he came and met with, when Bezos comes to the newsroom, all the staffs get 15 minutes with him. In our 15 minutes, somebody asked him, look, this is after Trump had won, but before he took over. Somebody said, look, Trump has threatened you. He calls, he's threatened to go after Amazon. Amazon has a huge amount of contracts with the government to do web, cloud storage, web services, things like that. Are you worried that Donald Trump will come after you? And Bezos said the exact thing you'd want a newspaper owner to say, no, I can take care of myself. I want you guys to do exactly what you would have done otherwise. I want you to do your jobs to the best of your abilities. Don't think about me. Don't try to protect me in any way. So that's all I can say is that's the interaction I've had with him, and that I've never heard of anybody having a different interaction with him where there's been some influence put on us by Amazon or by him on behalf of Amazon or any of his other companies. We're obviously alert to that, but newspapers have been owned by rich people for a long time. This is the business model. We were owned before by the Graham family, who were wonderful stewards of the Washington Post. They owned a bunch of other things. They owned Kaplan Testing Services. They owned an elevator company or an industrial boiler company. We managed through sort of the traditions of the newsroom. We never felt like there was a conflict of interest of us covering those things, and I hope it continues to be the same with Amazon.
One of the quotes you said earlier, somebody has it here, quote, "We're not at war, we're at work." They say it's a truly great line, but they question whether the aspect of war, some of the stories that you choose to cover, they see that as possibly being war. Would Fox News or Breitbart focus on those stories?
It's a good question, because people sometimes say that, like, well, last year, why did you only write about, when there were two candidates, why did you only write about Donald Trump's foundation? The answer is that there was a bunch of other people writing about Hillary Clinton's foundation, and the two foundations were so different, it wasn't really like the lessons of my reporting could be applied to the Clinton Foundation. They were just two different stories, and we pursued them as two different stories. Now covering the president, there's only one president, and so he's the person you have to cover. So the key for me is to try to think of ways to tell his side of the story if he's not going to. If the Trump Organization wants to talk to us and tell their side of the story, that makes it easy. If they don't, in my stories, what are the things I can do to try to tell the Trump Organization side of the story, to try to tell Donald Trump's side that these aren't conflicts of interest, that he's dealing with these conflicts of interest, and to be aware of that. If he's not going to supply that himself, what can I do to show readers that perspective, to find out things he might be doing that would be exculpatory for him, or if I can't, to show how hard I work to find those things. To be very demonstrative about what I've done to try to tell Donald Trump's side of the story or to give him a chance to tell it. That's what it means not to be at war with somebody. You want to tell those stories fairly and objectively, but not cover up something that's the truth just because it looks bad for the president.
And it looks like we have time for one last question. That's a lot of pressure.
All right.
So while I punt, I'm going to have one question from Skyline. They say, what is your personal Twitter? So you can say that while I'm looking for the very last question.
It's at FAHRENTHOLD. Just be sure you include the first H because, hold on. If you leave out this H, you get Blake Farenthold, who's a congressman from Texas who really, really likes Donald Trump, and you will be confused about why you're getting pro-Trump news and updates about Corpus Christi. So include the first H.
And the very last question from a student, would you say Twitter is a revolution in terms of investigative journalism?
It is. I mean, there's a lot of terrible things about Twitter, but it's a way to reach a huge audience quickly. And a way to have them talk back to you in a way that's manageable. I don't find that Facebook or Instagram or any of the other social media platforms are as good at making that connection between you and people who know what you want to know as Twitter. That said, it's really, this week I was reminded that you have to, as a reporter, it's important to think of your audience on Twitter as your audience and not the people whose tweets you follow. There's a lot of people who sort of fall into this kind of running conversation with the other couple hundred Washington reporters, Washington, pundits, and tweet jokes and sort of a conversation with them instead of using it actually as a platform to broadcast to the people that your readers, people you really want to talk to. I broke that rule this week when I made a joke about Garrison Keillor, because you know who Garrison Keillor is? He's a radio host. He breathes right on the microphone. He's terrible. I really don't like Garrison Keillor, and I made a joke about him on Twitter. For once, I forgot my rule and used it as a forum for petty joking. And they wrote the Minneapolis Star-Tribune wrote a B1 top of the Metro front page story about me insulting them and Garrison Keillor. And I've gotten all these emails from people in Minnesota, or people who used to live in Minnesota who hate me now. And so I feel like I've lost an audience in Minnesota because of that. So it's important for me to remember, like, I'm not there to have fun. I'm not there to carry on a running joke with these other Washington insiders. I'm there to do my job. And this week's been a good reminder of that. Anybody from Minnesota, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, that's a good. And as somebody who came from NPR, like taking that Prairie Home Companion hit was hard for me.
So bad.
I'm going to have to not follow you now, David. So thank you for coming. If we can just thank David for being here.
Thank you.
So an event like this makes our day, that we can spend a day in a room, hundreds of people in the afternoon to come to talk about journalism. It is not a war, but this was a win. And we would like to invite you to continue coming out and participating in conversations about journalism with us. I can almost anticipate my email that I get from people who say, but I go to Pioneer, I go to Huron, I go to Community. Let me stipulate, for those of you who we did not mention, who are students here, we want you to participate too. If you have children who go to any of the other schools in the area, ask your teachers to let them out of class to come to our events in the future. We will promise we will make it worth their while. And we'll have people at the back of the house. We have a newsletter and an email list that you can follow. We will send you information about our events so that you can plan them with your schedule. We have several good ones coming up in the next few months. Hopefully you picked up this sheet of paper when you came in, but just to turn your attention to a few events. In January, as part of the university's Martin Luther King Symposium, we'll have Lydia Polgreen here. She's the editor-in-chief of HuffPo for a talk called Who Gets to Define American Values? That should be a good one. Later on in January, we'll have a talk with one of our Livingston Award winners, the winner for national reporting this year. The talk is called Beyond the Wall, the Human Toll of Border Crossings with Brooke Jarvis. In February, making up for this public media slam that just happened on the stage here, February 15th, if you listen to Michigan radio, you'll know that there's a show that comes on every day that has replaced the Diane Rehm show. It's called 1A with Joshua Johnson. It's a fantastic show. Joshua's coming here to be our guest in February, on February 15th for a live show called Speak Freely, Debating the First Amendment in a Changing America. I hope the university students in particular really turn out for that one because it's going to be a really important event. And later on in February, Brett Stevens, columnist for the New York Times, also a really good university conversation, Free Speech and the Necessity of Discomfort. And then in March, Charles Eisendrath, who was the director of this program for 30 years before me. Charles, if you can just wave at people. We are happy that Charles is still an active part of Wallace House and of our community and helping us support journalism here. And so we were joking about it before. We've named a symposium, an annual symposium, in his honor to be held every spring. And this year, for the second Eisendrath Symposium on International News, we'll be talking about China's soft power. We hope to see you again. We are so glad that you are here to talk about journalism, and we are so glad to have David Fahrenthold here to spend an afternoon with us. Thank you for coming.